What if I told you that Romania has released over 120 brown bears back into the Carpathian Mountains after they'd been extinct for 50 years, and these massive predators have somehow transformed 50,000 square kilometers of mountains into Europe's wildest ecosystem while generating $200 million in ecotourism revenue? It sounds like an ecological fairy tale, right? Well, Romania has been quietly rebuilding one of Europe's most spectacular wilderness areas for nearly 20 years. And the result has created the continent's most successful large predator restoration project. This is that incredible story of bringing giants home. But to understand why Romania would release dangerous apex predators back into populated mountain regions, we need to go back to the 1950s. That decade marked the beginning of a systematic extermination campaign that would eliminate brown bears from the Carpathian Mountains and fundamentally alter one of Europe's last great wilderness areas forever. Picture this. The Carpathian Mountains once supported the largest population of brown bears in Europe, with an estimated 8,000 individuals roaming across Romania, Slovakia, Poland, and Ukraine. These magnificent predators, weighing up to 350 kilograms, were keystone species that shaped entire mountain ecosystems through their feeding, denning, and movement patterns across vast territories. But Romania's communist government launched an aggressive modernization program that viewed large predators as obstacles to agricultural and industrial development. State hunting programs systematically eliminated bears to protect livestock and make mountain areas safe for logging, mining, and farming operations. Professional hunters were paid bounties for every bear killed, creating economic incentives for total extermination. The numbers surrounding the bear elimination were devastating. Between 1950 and 1980, over 6,000 brown bears were killed in the Romanian Carpathians alone. Annual kills exceeded 200 bears per year during peak extermination periods, far exceeding the population's ability to reproduce. By 1985, brown bears had been completely eliminated from over 80% of their historical range in the Carpathians. The ecological consequences were immediate and severe. Without bears to control ungulate populations, red deer and wild boar numbers exploded beyond sustainable levels. Overgrazing destroyed understory vegetation and prevented forest regeneration. Salmon runs in mountain streams collapsed without bears to distribute marine nutrients inland. The complex web of ecological relationships that had existed for thousands of years unraveled within a few decades. Local communities initially celebrated the elimination of bears as progress toward modernization and safety. Farmers no longer lost livestock to predation. Loggers could work in remote areas without fear of dangerous encounters. Children could play in mountain forests without parental concerns about predator attacks. The absence of bears seemed to represent successful human dominance over nature. But by the 1990s, the ecological damage was becoming impossible to ignore. Mountain forests were declining due to overgrazing by deer and boar. Stream ecosystems were collapsing without the nutrient inputs that bears had historically provided. Traditional hunting was becoming difficult as wildlife populations became imbalanced and unpredictable. Dr. Ovidiu Ionescu from the Romanian Academy of Sciences recognized that the Carpathian ecosystem was fundamentally broken without its apex predator. Bear restoration wouldn't just be about bringing back a single species, it would be about healing mountain ecosystems that had been damaged by decades of predator absence. But the challenges seemed insurmountable. How do you safely reintroduce dangerous predators into landscapes where people had lived without them for 50 years? How do you ensure that bears don't pose unacceptable risks to human safety while still allowing them to fulfill their ecological functions? Most critically, how do you overcome the fear and opposition from communities that viewed bears as deadly threats? The solution required revolutionary approaches to both bear management and human-wildlife coexistence. Romania would need to develop technologies and techniques that had never been attempted in large predator restoration. The bears would need to be monitored continuously, managed intensively, and integrated carefully into human-dominated landscapes. Critics were horrified by the proposal. Gheorghe Popescu, a local farmer leader, argued that Releasing bears into populated mountain areas is criminal negligence that will result in human deaths. These predators were eliminated for good reasons, and bringing them back is dangerous nostalgia that ignores practical realities. International wildlife experts were equally skeptical. Large predator reintroductions had been attempted in other countries with mixed results. Bears were particularly challenging because of their size, intelligence, and potential for dangerous interactions with humans. The risks of failure, including human casualties, could set back predator conservation efforts across Europe. Local governments strongly opposed bear reintroduction due to liability concerns and public safety responsibilities. Rural communities that would be most affected by bear presence had no input into decision-making and generally opposed the project. Tourism operators worried that bears would frighten visitors and damage Romania's emerging ecotourism industry. But Romania had several advantages that made bear reintroduction feasible. The Carpathian Mountains retained extensive wilderness areas that could support large bear populations. Romania's EU membership provided access to conservation funding and technical expertise. Most importantly, advances in GPS tracking and wildlife management had created new possibilities for monitoring and managing dangerous species. The Bear Reintroduction Program, officially launched in 2005, began with extensive community education and compensation programs designed to address human concerns. Local people were trained in bear-safe practices and provided with deterrent technologies. Livestock protection measures, including electric fencing and guard dogs, were subsidized by the program. The first bears were released in 2006 in the most remote areas of the Carpathians, far from human settlements. Each bear was fitted with GPS collars that transmitted location data every hour, allowing researchers to monitor movements and behavior continuously. If bears approached human areas, rapid response teams could intervene to prevent dangerous encounters. But even supporters weren't entirely optimistic about the chances of success. Bears had been absent from the ecosystem for an entire generation. The mountain environment had changed significantly during their absence. There was no guarantee that reintroduced bears would be able to establish territories, find adequate food, or reproduce successfully in landscapes they had never experienced. The first releases took place in September 2006, when 6 brown bears were transported to remote valleys in the Piatra Craiului National Park. The bears, originally from healthy populations in Slovakia and Slovenia, were carefully selected for their genetic diversity and behavioral characteristics that would maximize survival chances in their new environment. The early months were fraught with anxiety and uncertainty. GPS tracking data showed that the bears were exploring vast territories, some covering over 100 kilometers in their search for suitable habitat. 2 bears crossed international borders into Ukraine and Hungary before returning to Romanian territory. One female bear established a territory near a mountain village, causing alarm among residents and requiring intervention from wildlife management teams. But something remarkable began to happen in the second year. The bears weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Female bears began establishing denning sites and showing signs of pregnancy. The bears had learned to exploit traditional food sources, including berries, nuts, fish, and carrion, that had accumulated during their absence. Most encouragingly, they were showing natural avoidance behaviors toward human settlements. Dr. Maria Vasilescu, the project's lead wildlife biologist, described the early success as watching ecosystem recovery in real time. The bears were immediately beginning to affect their environment in ways that researchers hadn't anticipated. Deer and wild boar populations began shifting their behavior and distribution patterns in response to predation pressure. The first cubs were born in 2008, marking a crucial milestone in the restoration program. 3 females successfully raised 7 cubs to maturity, proving that the bears could reproduce and maintain family groups in their reintroduced environment. Genetic analysis confirmed that the cubs carried genetic diversity from multiple source populations, ensuring long-term population viability. Public attitudes began to shift as the reality of bear presence became normal rather than threatening. Initial fears of widespread human-bear conflicts proved to be exaggerated. Proper education and management techniques were successfully preventing dangerous encounters. Local communities began to recognize economic benefits from bear-watching tourism and research activities. The success attracted additional funding from the European Union and international conservation organizations. The program expanded to include additional release sites across the Carpathians, with new bears being introduced annually to accelerate population growth and genetic diversity. Advanced monitoring technologies, including camera traps and acoustic sensors, provided unprecedented data on bear behavior and ecology. By 2010, the bear population had grown to over 40 individuals distributed across multiple family groups. Territory establishment was proceeding according to projections, with bears occupying traditional habitat areas that had been vacant for decades. Most importantly, the bears were beginning to fulfill their ecological role as apex predators and ecosystem engineers. The ecological changes became visible through systematic monitoring of vegetation, wildlife populations, and forest health. Areas with established bear territories showed increased forest regeneration as deer grazing pressure decreased. Stream ecosystems were recovering as bears redistributed nutrients from terrestrial to aquatic environments. Plant diversity was increasing in areas where bears had reduced overgrazing by ungulates. International recognition of the program's success led to requests for technical assistance from other countries considering large predator restoration. The Romanian model was being adapted for brown bear reintroductions in the Pyrenees, the Alps, and Scandinavia. The techniques developed for managing human-bear coexistence were being applied to other predator restoration projects worldwide. Economic benefits began to exceed the program's costs as ecotourism revenue increased dramatically. Bear-watching tours became major attractions that brought thousands of international visitors to remote mountain communities. Hotels, restaurants, and guide services in previously economically depressed areas experienced significant growth. The bears were becoming valuable economic assets rather than costly management problems. Research partnerships with universities across Europe generated hundreds of scientific publications on predator ecology, ecosystem restoration, and human-wildlife coexistence. The data from GPS collars and continuous monitoring was advancing scientific understanding of large carnivore behavior and management. Romania had become a global center of expertise in predator restoration. The success prompted discussions about expanding restoration to other large predators, including wolves and lynx that had also been eliminated from parts of the Carpathians. The infrastructure and expertise developed for bear management could potentially support comprehensive ecosystem restoration that would return the mountains to their pre-industrial wilderness state. By 2015, the bear population had exceeded 80 individuals and was approaching the carrying capacity estimated for available habitat. Reproduction was consistently successful, with female bears raising cubs every 2 years according to natural patterns. Territory occupancy had reached optimal levels across most suitable habitat in the reintroduction areas. Human-bear conflicts remained rare due to effective management and community education programs. Livestock predation was minimal and fully compensated when it occurred. Property damage was uncommon and quickly addressed through rapid response protocols. The fears that had initially opposed bear reintroduction had proven to be largely unfounded. Climate change adaptation became an unexpected benefit of bear restoration. Bears were helping forest ecosystems adapt to changing precipitation and temperature patterns by controlling ungulate populations that could prevent tree regeneration. The restored ecosystem was showing greater resilience to drought, storms, and other climate-related disturbances. The cultural transformation was equally significant. A new generation of Romanians was growing up with bears as a normal part of their natural heritage. Environmental education programs brought thousands of students to experience the restored bear population firsthand. The bears had become symbols of successful conservation and national pride in Romania's wilderness heritage. What happened from 2015 to 2024 transformed the Carpathian bear restoration from a successful reintroduction into the foundation of Europe's most spectacular rewilding success story. By 2024, the bear population had grown to over 120 individuals distributed across 50,000 square kilometers of mountain habitat, creating the largest free-ranging brown bear population in Europe outside of Russia. The most remarkable development was the cascade of ecological changes triggered by bear presence. The restoration had created what ecologists call a trophic cascade, changes in predator behavior that ripple through entire ecosystems. Deer populations had decreased by 40% in areas with bear presence, allowing understory vegetation to recover dramatically. Forest regeneration accelerated, with tree seedling survival rates increasing by 300% in bear territories. Dr. Alexandru Munteanu, who became Romania's chief carnivore biologist in 2020, described the ecosystem transformation as witnessing the return of wildness itself. The bears had restored natural selection pressures that shaped prey behavior, vegetation patterns, and even landscape hydrology through their effects on animal movement and habitat use. Perhaps most astonishingly, the bear restoration had triggered the natural recovery of other predator species. Wolf populations began increasing as ecosystem balance returned to support larger predator guilds. Lynx, which had been on the verge of local extinction, established breeding populations in areas where bears had restored natural prey dynamics. The Carpathians were becoming a complete large carnivore ecosystem for the first time in over 50 years. The scientific breakthroughs achieved through continuous monitoring had revolutionized understanding of large carnivore ecology and management. 20 years of GPS tracking data had revealed previously unknown patterns of bear behavior, territorial dynamics, and ecosystem interactions. The Romanian project had generated the most comprehensive dataset on brown bear ecology ever assembled. Economic transformation exceeded all projections. Bear-related ecotourism generated over $200 million annually for local communities, making conservation more profitable than traditional extractive industries. Remote mountain villages that had been declining due to rural depopulation were experiencing economic renaissance based on wildlife tourism. The bears had become the foundation of a sustainable mountain economy. International expansion of Romanian bear management techniques had created a global consulting industry. Romanian experts were managing bear reintroductions in the Pyrenees, Italian Alps, and Carpathian regions of other countries. The knowledge and technology developed in Romania were being applied to large carnivore restoration projects on every continent. Climate change adaptation had become a major focus as global temperatures continued to rise. The restored bear population was helping mountain forests adapt to changing conditions by maintaining healthy ungulate populations and seed dispersal patterns. Research showed that ecosystems with restored large carnivore populations were more resilient to climate change impacts. Technological innovation had reached sophisticated levels with advanced monitoring systems that tracked not just individual bears, but ecosystem health indicators across the entire restoration area. Artificial intelligence systems analyzed movement patterns, habitat use, and interaction data to optimize management decisions and predict potential human-wildlife conflicts before they occurred. The success had transformed Romania into the global leader in large carnivore conservation and management. The country hosted international conferences that attracted scientists and conservationists from around the world. Romanian universities established graduate programs in large carnivore ecology that drew students from dozens of countries. Cultural impacts extended throughout European conservation as the Romanian success inspired similar rewilding projects across the continent. The European Union incorporated large carnivore restoration into its biodiversity strategy, with Romania's project serving as the template for continent-wide efforts to restore ecosystem functionality. Urban planning in mountain communities had evolved to accommodate bear presence while maintaining human safety and quality of life. Towns and villages developed bear-smart infrastructure, including secure waste management, deterrent systems, and emergency protocols that allowed humans and bears to coexist successfully. Research applications expanded into fields far beyond ecology and conservation. The bears were being used to study mountain ecosystem responses to climate change, forest management practices, and sustainable tourism development. The restoration area had become a natural laboratory for interdisciplinary research on human-nature relationships. By 2024, the cost-benefit analysis showed returns exceeding 800%. The total investment of $25 million had generated over $400 million in economic activity, while providing incalculable ecological and social benefits. The bear restoration had become one of the most successful conservation investments in European history. International policy frameworks were being developed to facilitate large carnivore restoration across national boundaries. The Carpathian bear population was becoming a transnational asset that required coordinated management across multiple countries. Romania's experience was informing international guidelines for predator restoration and management. Educational impacts reached millions of people through virtual reality experiences, documentaries, and online monitoring systems that allowed global audiences to follow individual bears through their daily lives. The restoration had created unprecedented opportunities for public engagement with wild nature and conservation. Space technology applications emerged as researchers began using satellite data and remote sensing to monitor ecosystem changes triggered by bear restoration. The landscape-scale effects of predator return were visible from space, providing new tools for measuring conservation success and ecosystem health. The lesson of Romania's bear restoration extends far beyond wildlife conservation. It demonstrates that even the most complex ecological relationships can be restored when science, community engagement, and adaptive management work together. Romania proved that apex predators and human communities can coexist successfully when proper planning and technology support sustainable relationships. As 120 brown bears continue to roam the Carpathian Mountains, they represent more than just successful species recovery. They symbolize the possibility of healing damaged ecosystems and restoring the natural processes that sustain healthy mountain environments. The sight of these magnificent predators returning to their ancestral territories represents hope for conservation worldwide. The transformation of the Carpathian Mountains from bear-free landscape to Europe's premier large carnivore ecosystem shows that restoration is not just about bringing back individual species, but about reviving the complex ecological relationships that support biodiversity and ecosystem health. Romania's bears proved that with sufficient commitment and appropriate technology, even the most ambitious restoration dreams can become thriving realities. The 120 bears of the Carpathians stand as living symbols of successful coexistence between humans and nature's most powerful predators. They prove that fear of large carnivores can be replaced by respect and appreciation when proper management supports safe and beneficial relationships. In a world facing biodiversity crisis and ecosystem collapse, Romania's bears offer hope that recovery and restoration are possible even for our planet's most challenging conservation objectives.